Hello, Morgan. This is SIGRID DYEKJÆR from Copenhagen, producer, and I'm so happy to be here tonight, my time, today, your time, to talk about your incredible film, Roadrunner, about Anthony Bourdain, Tony as he's called in the film. And first of all, Morgan, I just want to say that I'm a great fan of your films.
Thank you.
I've watched, I think, almost all of them. And I remember when I was younger, it was like, wow, that's really a great American storyteller. It's not all American films I'm a fan of. I have to admit, I'm very European in my taste. But I am a great fan of you. And I think that one of the things about your filmmaking that I really treasure is that you spend time and you dig deep and you find characters and you slowly unfold them in front of the camera, and you really make me as an audience connect with the character that you have decided that you want to make a film about. So I think a lot of your films connects with you somehow, and that's what's making me connect with them and actually shed a tear. So thank you so much for your profound film work. And
thank you for saying that.
Well, and I have to tell you that your film Roadrunner, it's not always that my husband wants to stay and watch the films that I want to watch because there's so many Academy films. But this film, he joined me and watched it, and he was very taken by it, and he was crying towards the end. And he's a big man with long work in journalism and getting used to camera and newsy stuff. But your film really touched him on a very deep level. So I just want to congratulate you on that, as well as it touched me, but also a big man.
Well, thank you for saying all that. And you're totally right that, people don't talk a whole lot about the fact that when we make films as documentarians about other subjects, of course, we're also making films about ourselves, whether they're the subjects we're attracted to or the way we choose to tell those stories. And honestly, one of the first reasons I really connected with the idea of making this film was I felt Tony was kind of a documentary filmmaker. Exactly. In a way. He was also a journalist, and he was a writer, and he was all these things that I kind of think of myself as. And the fact that he had used television and books to use food as a way to kind of open up these cultural conversations about who we are and who other people are and how we define the other and ourselves. I feel like that's what I've been doing my whole life. So, when he died, part of my sadness was like, oh, this is like somebody fighting the good fight who's doing the same kind of work we're all trying to do, which is make people walk in other people's shoes and kind of understand how much we have in common, how dimensional and complex other people are, but also how relatable other people are.
And I think it's such big bravery, to embark on a film when you knew that he had committed suicide. And that as I understood you, there was a chance to dive into all this material that the estate had about him. And I think, that's very brave of you to do that. And to some extent, I wanted to, ask you a personal question, like, what was it inside you as a filmmaker that actually wanted you to go into that kind of tough material, knowing what you knew?
I think there was a certain amount of willful ignorance on my part, that
good and
which you kind of, it's they say that women who give birth have a certain kind of amnesia about the kind of the pain and trauma of childbirth, and and I think
we say, "Oh, I'll do it again. This was amazing." Yeah.
So documentary filmmakers, it's the same thing. Each one is so painful, and you're like, no, it'll be interesting, and you kind of talk yourself into it.
But
And
this
the only
is
thing,
giving yourself an extra task, because
yeah,
there is pain when somebody commits suicide, and there is a tough experience going into it. And there are so many people living today that is so hurt by the fact that a person commits suicide. So to embark on that storytelling is just giving yourself an extra couple of layers of
yeah. I
problem.
mean, it was very difficult. But I think my initial instinct was just more of curiosity. I mean, the thing is, with somebody like Tony, there was such a sense of, incomprehensibility about why this guy who had all this kind of, people, even David Chappelle, when he did his first Netflix comedy special, the first joke he made was essentially, Tony Bourdain killed himself, and that guy had the perfect life, kind of what hope is there for the rest of us? So
Yeah.
I think in the public, there was this sense of like, how can this smart, cool, worldly guy who seems to have it all kill himself? And there was no good answer. And that was, to me as a storyteller, something that I wanted that answer to. I was curious about. It wasn't necessarily, I want to make a film about suicide. It was, I want to make a film to understand what could make somebody who I so related to do something so unrelatable and unimaginable in that way.
So was that sort of your dramaturgical coin you were flipping constantly? Like, was that your, from the early on, like even the images and the scenes you picked from his first part of the material, which I think is a documentary film that wasn't finished, right? And you got that material and started working with that. So knowing that the suicide was sort of the mission to maybe not come with an answer, but at least shed a light on all the aspects of it. Was that sort of your thread throughout the material? Or
although I would almost think of it backwards, which is knowing the ending of the story, I think I really, really went out of my way at every stage, from the interviews to the edit, to not look at the story backwards, but to look at it forwards. I mean, we read history backwards, but we live it forwards. So in trying to get acquainted with who this guy was, trying to understand the journey he went on. And even when we started editing, I said to Eileen Meyer, one of my editors, when we started, I said, I want you to look at the beginning of his life. I want you to look at the parts of the interviews, and we, got into the material about kind of picking up the story where we do, which is when the footage begins and when he first has his first spark of success. He's 43 years old. And I said, I don't want you to think about his death at all. I don't want you to look at any of those interviews, just utterly put it out of your mind. And so, and I've never done this before. We actually cut the first scene, and then we cut the second scene, and then we cut the third scene. We were like, well, where's the story want to go now? And we just kept doing that till we had the first 40 minutes of the film. So we cut it linearly in that way and so for the first several months of editing, we literally did not talk about his death at all, because we wanted to spend time with who this guy was. And what you see in the beginning of the film is very close to where we had started, which is this guy who's smart and everything and seems worldly, but he's not. Like, he hasn't been anywhere. He's kind of naive, he's boyish, even at 43, and you see the kind of like giddy excitement of all these possibilities of, oh, I get to sign a book and I get to go on a book tour. Isn't that cool? And that journey. And as we were kind of building that way, certain things started to come to the surface, and I think really at the end of the day, to me, the film's, I mean, it's about this man, but I would say in terms of subjects, it's less about suicide and more about addiction, because I think that's really Tony's
and to some extent about the fragility of man. You can't really take your success for granted. Like, we all have this fragility, and something might go a little bit wrong, like addictions or anxiety or something else that suddenly starts untuning us. And I think that's what's so smart about the film, that it you might have edited it that way, but you cannot say that you didn't know that he committed suicide. So to some extent, by letting your subconsciousness work together with your good filmmaking skills, at least I felt, because I'm also an audience that knows that he committed suicide. So in a way, by I think by not allowing you to do it subconsciously, but doing it, or consciously, but letting it be subconsciously, it's still there. Like every scene is so cleverly in the beginning pointing so much towards the bigger issues that this guy has.
And that's what I was thinking about, you know, and obviously us as a viewer knowing how the story ends, we're filling in some of that too.
Exactly.
And so
But
it's
you're not
figuring out.
over-telling it to us. You are doing it the European way, meaning letting us as an audience start feeling something ourselves.
And this is something that I'm a huge believer in, and I think Tony was too. And this is something I didn't even fully, I certainly intellectually hadn't understood it, but when I got into really understanding him and even how he talked about his work with the people he worked with, you know, my big thing is I love question seeking and not providing answers, and certainly not providing tidy answers. And you know, other films I've done, a film like Won't You Be My Neighbor is a film full of questions. You know,
Yes.
so many scenes end on questions. The film ends on a question, you know, and I kind of love empowering the audience to, like, I'm not going to spoon feed you anything. You know, you need to figure out how you feel about it. And Tony so believed that, you know, and even in the film, we talk about him kind of coming to this realization around the time he was shooting this Beirut episode, where he just said, I'm not going to sum up anything anymore. Like, that's not how life works. You know, there is no tidy sum up. And he really started to love the kind of nuance and messiness of things, which I do too, which I think, you know, a lot of storytellers do, which is things are not reductive. People are not reductive, you know, so embrace the kind of messiness of it. And in that way, I felt like that was exactly how I had to approach Tony. It's like, there's no wrapping up his story with a bow, because Tony was this protean character who had all these different facets, and different people saw him very differently. And I think he presented himself differently to almost everybody he knew. Even his different crews he worked with, he had very different relationships with them.
Yeah.
It's like a strict father or an older brother, you know, but he definitely was just different with everybody. He could show a different side based on what they needed from him or what he needed from them. And so it was just kind of leaning into that murkiness, because that grayness is what he really loved.
And I think, you know, what's also very nice in your filmmaking, you know, creating a piece about a character that is in a specific way, it's like, it feels like you are also getting to know him along the way. Like, for some reason, there's something in the editing, and I've been trying to figure out what is it. Like, are they keeping back information, or what is the technique of doing this? But there is a technical side in your film where you are getting to know your character along the way, which is also how he is, because he is changing himself along the way. So in a way, you found this method of filmmaking that mirrors your character and your character's development. And I don't know if this was something that you did on purpose, or you somehow got so mesmerized by the material that it just simply happened, or, you know, what was your take on that?
Well, I mean, the unusual thing about this film too was the amount of material we had to draw from was absolutely mind-boggling, you know, maybe 20,000 hours, insane. And, you know, I knew from the beginning, if we didn't have a plan of how to how to attack that material, that we would get lost. And so, at a certain point, an archival doc, as you might call this, becomes like a verite documentary, and he's somebody who
like an archival doc, and that's also to your compliments. I never felt it like an archival doc at all. I felt that the curiosity was always going together with the character's development.
That's great.
And that keeps it away, that makes it not become an archival film where you're the clever one and you're looking back on somebody who's not here anymore and you're more clever than that person.
Well, and thank you for saying it, but I think part of having that much footage is that, what I kind of said from the beginning in terms of approaching the material was, this is not, I never want us to think about, a certain episode of his show, or, I think there's a way you could do kind of a greatest hits version,
yes.
For people that really knew his story or had read his books. And I'm like, well, you got to show me that famous scene, or you got to show, this character he loved. And I was like, I don't care about any of that. What I care about is when I see Tony changing on camera, learning something, like that's all I care about. It was like, let's look at this material as though it's our raw verite footage, and let's just focus on him. And when you see him actually learning or changing, kind of regardless of when it happens or where it happens. And so that, and I also said, whenever we're eliminating footage, that's a victory. So don't get precious about it.
It's a scary process that you embarked on. And I still don't understand how you had the guts to do it, because taking a very big TV icon, trying to make a film, knowing that the guy committed suicide and that you have to somehow be responsible towards all the people around him who loved him and maybe was hurt by him deciding not to continue on this planet with them right now. That's just huge bravery as a filmmaker. I mean, and making it a cinema film and making it feel like it's verite, but it is really archive. I mean, it's good it was not your first film. Let me put it that way, because you cheated me, and I'm sure you actually hopefully cheated a lot of audiences to think that you were doing a contemporary film about Anthony Bourdain. I want to touch upon the question, like the moral responsibility of embarking on a film where there's so many people around him that loved him, that was hurt by his decision. I think it's an extremely powerful ending on the movie, and very touching with the different people around him. Can you explain a little bit about what type of responsibility and how did you decide to do that?
Well, I feel like us as documentary filmmakers, like a big part of what we do is trust, that we're in the trust business, and getting people to share their intimate thoughts and lives with us. And in doing the interviews, and these were, I've said this before, they were the most difficult interviews I've ever done. And they weren't just the interviews we did on camera, that I think there was both a sense of just who am I and what did I want? I spent a lot of time talking to people before I interviewed them, and a lot of time talking to them after and since I've interviewed them, and even since the films come out, and a sense of kind of what my goal was. And then there was also this sense of it's the messed up thing about suicide is when people are dealing with a suicide in their lives, that it's tied up in so many screwed up emotions. People feel anger, they feel guilt, they feel abandonment. There are all these feelings, and because of the kind of stigma of suicide, people don't feel like they have permission to talk about it in the same way. And so many people in the film told me that they had never really talked to anybody about it.
Wow.
including, Chris and Lydia, the husband-wife couple that run the production company that partnered with him. They said they'd never talked to each other about it. And they talked to me first. I think there was a kind of just a sense of, it was horrible and I'm just going to bottle it up, and I think.
So do you think that somehow the reason, do you think that they actually also needed you in some ways, like a camera to start that process? What we often talk about in documentary filmmaking is, okay, we go in and we want to tell the stories and we suck, everything out of the characters in order to do a great movie. But I feel personally the movies that really work for me is when there's some kind of sharing, that somehow the film also becomes extremely important for the characters, because it also somehow starts a healing process for them.
Mm-hmm.
So
I mean, I will say, I didn't think about this when I started making the film, but without a doubt, this film was a massive therapy project for the people in the film, for myself, and ultimately, I hope, for the public in some way, of like trying to process something. But most importantly, for the people in Tony's life, these interviews and the time I've spent with them are very much like therapy, because I'm asking people to kind of tell me what they think. And even in the time I've known these people, I think they've been going through different stages of processing, from anger to grief to even a sense of kind of understanding, and I think the film reflects my experience of making the film too. I think had I made the film 10 years from now, it would not have been as raw, and I think what I was trying to reflect in the film was this sense of pain and hurt. And there's, that's why I dedicate a certain amount of time in the film, not just to Tony's death, but to the aftermath of Tony's death, and really understanding the crater it left in these people's lives, that there's.
So do you think it's actually an advantage that you made the film so close to his actual death? I mean, it's not that many years ago. It's not like, 10 years later or 25 years later, you go and do a film. Do you think it somehow maybe was an advantage that it was not so long ago that he died? So you also had that rawness, like access to the rawness inside yourself?
I mean, it's different. I can't, I like to think it was more immediate, because of the amount of kind of literally people processing things on camera for the first time. And I don't even think of it as on camera. It's like, the camera, when I do interviews, the whole goal is to make people forget there's a camera there. And I actually, in the film, I interview everybody at a table. I'm sitting across the table. We're kind of breaking bread and we're talking. And I just want it to be us in a conversation for hours. And part of my thing with interviews is, I stay 100% engaged in the person I'm talking to. I don't even look at my notes during an interview.
No.
Like we're having the conversation. We're going to take it wherever it goes, as however long it's going to take. And if you do that, I think people forget kind of the setting of what's happening, and not in a way of trickery, but in a way of just trying to be human and be intimate and say something you would say to a friend, or, and I think there was also this sense, because of who Tony was, that there was like a no tolerance for bullshit, that I think Tony, the idea that people would say, oh, Tony was such a great guy. And, I just, everybody loved him. And I was so proud of what we did. Like, all that may be true, but the idea in doing something hagiographic about Tony, something was like, he would have hated that, he was his own worst critic, and I think.
He wouldn't want a film like that. He
No.
wouldn't want people to sit and say those things. He would be like, that's terrifying. And
I think people in his life got that.
Yeah, and I think that's all. I think you got that, and we also got it as an audience, because you kind of took us so thoroughly through who he developed as a character to be. So had you even done kind of that type of ending, oh, he was such a great man, blah blah blah, we wouldn't have bought it. Like, we would have been like, that's weird. Now you're going on a weird place with this ending, because we would have gotten to know him and would know that that wouldn't go, you know. So I think what's really powerful about these interviews towards the end is that they actually become scenes more than they are interviews, because when they open, it's like the character don't know where this interview is gonna go. You don't know it either. And because you're such a good filmmaker, you allow yourself to go with that moment and let it become a scene more than an actual interview. So it doesn't have information, it has emotions, and it actually kind of lifts itself. And that's why the film becomes so relevant to me. Even I'm a stupid Dane living in Copenhagen, and I didn't see any of the guys' food shows, you know. It's much more about life and death and relationships and human character and the complexity that we all have within us, and even the complexity that comes out if a person decides to leave the planet themselves in this way.
Thank you for saying that. I mean, one thing that, as I was making the film, became apparent to me was that I really wanted the audience to build a relationship with everybody in the film.
Yeah.
So something I've never done before, where I introduced people in the context of where they come into the story. So nobody could talk in the film, is my own rule, until they're kind of introduced in the story.
Yes.
And so you know exactly who everybody is in the film and where they fit into his story. And I actually interviewed at least a dozen more people than are in the film, and some amazing people who said amazing things. But I started to realize that I wanted the audience to have a rapport with each person in the film, so that when it got to his death, that you would feel the impact on these people. It wasn't just a ton of talking heads coming in and saying things. It was,
that's such a good rule. That's a really good rule. You should keep that rule for more films, because I think that's a very intelligent rule, because that's what you feel as an audience, that you're not being bombarded with people, because you also want to have your own feelings there. So if you are bombarded with a lot of talking heads and very famous people or whatever saying stuff about him, it's like you're removing the emotions away from the audience building their own emotions. And my emotions are much stronger than any of your characters. You know, the audience emotions are the biggest, bigger than any character in any film. So in that sense, it's a super clever rule. And wow, I think that's going to be in my book of rules for documentary film.
I'd never done it quite like that, and it was difficult, but I'm really, I was really proud of how we were able to do that in the end.
Of course, it's difficult because you know how many great characters you have, and you somehow have to trust another great rule, which is the audience don't know what they're missing. So if you like, 100%. you know what should have been there, but it's so nice about the audience that they actually do not know what they're missing. So in a way, it's kind of trusting that. So you have you are the decision maker to what journey you are putting me on as an audience.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, Morgan, and I'm so sorry the time is running, and I'm getting these notes that we're passing the 30-minute talk, but I could continue this talk because I think it's really also kind of a masterclass in documentary filmmaking. And I know that it's not a film that a beginner could have made. It's a film that a really experienced filmmaker made. And I just hope you're gonna continue and make 100 more films, because you're really on a good track, and you're so respectful towards your characters and so respectful towards your theme and how you actually go about your characters. I feel I'm almost like crying, but I really treasure it, and we need more filmmakers like you.
Oh, thank you so much. No,
Very
I so appreciate you talking to me about this, and I love talking about the process this way. You know, we don't always get to talk about it, but I really appreciate you taking the time.
Of course. I mean, we could continue half an hour more.
Yeah.
And on next festival I meet you, I'll bug you again and I'll ask you, you know, how many weeks of editing and, you know, all those basic questions. But I feel you've answered a lot of those questions I saw in a lot of other Q&As and stuff. So I really wanted to talk with you about this moral way of working with your character and yourself, because I feel there is a lot of you inside this film, which is really beautiful.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Thank you so much. Looking
Yeah.
forward to the next film.
Absolutely. You too.
Bye-bye.